Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Virtual Thursdays Dire Literary Series, streaming on my timeline. If you're part of the virtual group and you're looking for the stream, that's where it is. And sorry about that. Not my fault. So our guest tonight is the wonderful poet and essayist and translator, Danielle Legros Georges. And here is a little bit about her. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome awesome. To Virtual Thursdays. All right. Yeah. Technical difficulties are great. And give me a sec. That's what I want to do. So I blame this one. I blame myself for. Let's try this here. Here we go. Danielle Legros Georges is a Haitian-born professor, emerita of creative writing at Lesley University, now retired. She served as poetry laureate of Boston laureate from 2014 to 2019. She's the author and translator of several books of poetry. Her work has been supported by fellowships and grants from the American Antiquarian Society, the Heim Translation Fund, the Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art, the Massachusetts Culture Council, the Boston Foundation, and the Black Metropolis Research Consortium. And also, she is the editor of Wheatley at 250, and it's a wonderful book. It's Wheatley at 250, Black Women Poets Reimagine the Verse of Phyllis Wheatley Peters. And the cover is down here. And it's really, really wonderful stuff. So without anything from me, let me hand it on over to Danielle. Hi, Danielle.
Hi, Tim. Thank you for the invitation to read in the Dire series. I'm very happy to be here with you and with everyone in the audience. And I'll read three poems this evening, beginning with one entitled A Stateless Poem. If you are born and you are stateless, if you're born and you are homeless, if your state and home are not yours and yet everything you know, what are you? Who are you? And who am I without the dark fields I walk upon, the streets I know, the blue corners I call mine, the ones you call yours? Who am I to call myself citizen and human and free? And who are you to call yourself landed and grounded and free? Who is judge enough? Who native? Who other? And who are we who move so freely without accents of identification, without skin of identification, with all manner of identification, with gold seals of approval, with stamps of good fortune, with the accident of blameless birth, for we to be so lucky. I've been working on a chapbook on the instances of self-emancipation by Black people in New England, enslaved persons in New England during times of slavery in New England. So I've been reading a lot of legal cases, what are called freedom suits, as well as fugitive slave ads, in which the writers of those ads, right, attempt to describe the runaway who has absconded with themselves. And so the writers are trying often to figure out how to describe their slave. And so there are lots of ways in which writers try to describe Blackness. So you'll hear some of the language directly from the ads, and then what I hope is a poem around that language. This poem is entitled The Many Names, and it begins with an epigraph by Eric Morales Franceschini. Black, negro, once meant the color of the night sky, negro. Once meant a line of demarcation so clear as to be a sword. Once meant wholly distinct. Extinction mark, attempt. Meant many names for the status. Complexion meant description bade for the body, its recovery, the body. How like the dark obsidian mirror through which such strata surface and disappear in the night. Is deep black, is coal black, is jet black, is very black, is handsome black, is pretty black, is of dark color but cannot be said to be black, is of black cast but not the very blackest, is a dark grief color, a copper color, an olive color, a dark brown or gingerbread color, is of a pale complexion, tawny, yellow, is of a light color, of a swarthy complexion, of a brownish complexion, is blacker than common with a remarkable Roman nose, is of a reddish complexion, is of the color of morning before first light, the color of cusp and nerve, the color of morning deferred. The two liberations of Crispus Attucks. And as you may know, Crispus Attucks was considered the first casualty of the American Revolution, of the Independence War. He was killed by British troops on March 7th, 1770, in what would be known later as the Boston Massacre. The two liberations of Crispus Attucks. First, from his master, who had this to say about the mulatto fellow, about 26 years of age, named Crispus. How his hair was short and curled, his knees nearer together than common, and his bearskin coat light colored, that his breeches were made of new buckskin, his yard stockings blue, his woolen shirt checked. What he did not see is what he did not see. The empty space of Crispus. How like smoke, like nothing, like dust, he disappeared. So to write him in, to restore the it of him, the ad and mugshot, paid for and run, October 2nd, 1750, Boston Gazette. Whoever shall take up said runaway and convey him to his above said master shall have 10 pounds, old tenor reward, and all necessary charges paid. And all masters of vessels and others are hereby cautioned against concealing or carrying off said servant on penalty of the law. For the weight of him, for the worth of him, who stands presently martyr and master of his wounded and full self, first among men before enslavement, among them the actual unconceptually detained, Crispus taking the first bullet like a 21st century black man, like a black man in a car, to convey him up the freeway, the way to free, the way from tyranny. Thank you.
Well, thank you. What a wonderful collection of work that you've read for us tonight. And I almost want to show people really quick your new book. Congratulations on your new book, by the way. And there it is, Three Leaves, Three Roots, poems on the Haiti Congo story, Raised Voices. So congratulations on that. And this book, you take it's historical poems that are taken from like the era of 1960 to 1975. So which will go right into Robert's question. Writing a poem inspired by historical material, what are your tips or traps so you produce a poem and not just the historical facts spit out as if they could be taken from Wikipedia?
Yeah, that is a great question, Robert. The poem has to begin, well, it doesn't have to, but often begins, such a poem often begins with the historical data, right? With the research. But at some point, the material has to move from historical narrative to poetry. And that's the challenge of the poet, to figure out the way in, right? And to have the poem have some resonance beyond fact. Is it does one enter the poem through the subjectivity of a person who has experienced the historical moment? Does one look at a broader context to make some kind of important statement? What insights can be drawn from history? So these are the questions a poet often encounters in working with the archive. One example from my own work is I was looking at some material in at the Concord Free Library, doing some research on missing narratives of Concord and of the American Transcendentalist movement. And I found a bill of sale for a girl, an enslaved girl, a 2-year-old. And the bill of sale just absolutely stopped me. I had a very emotional reaction to this legal instrument, right, with all of the legalese language, right, for the selling of a person. And I thought, what do I do with this? And what do I do with what I'm feeling? So what the poem ended up being is a poem in 2 parts. One, the legal instrument, which is about a paragraph long, right? In which the girl's name is like struck and she's renamed, right, in this bill of sale. So that's the first half of the poem. And then the second half of the poem is a litany, a repetition of her original name, Violet, 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 to bring this, the child back, right? The child, her parents, the midwife, the humanity of this child. And that was the word repeated many, many times that made the second half of the poem in my reaction to it.
Wow, that's an incredible story. And also historical work with the new book. So the time frame obviously puts you back into your own childhood. Did the memories of your childhood or the history around that affect the poems that showed up in the book, or were you just, I know that you interviewed people, you did some research. Um, which was the stronger pull, and did you find out anything new?
Yeah, yeah. Uh, I think the stronger pull was the history for me, because it's a story that a lot of people aren't aware of. Essentially, in the 1960s and 1970s, Haiti, where I'm from originally, had a dictatorship, the Duvalier dictatorship, supported by the United States, which forced a lot of critics of that dictatorship to flee, my parents included, and a bunch of Haitians moved to Africa to work and teach and live in Africa and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. They were young, they were in their 20s and 30s, they were just starting their careers. And a lot of people don't know this story, this Haitian story, Haitians going to Africa. We often have, I think in mainstream media, these ideas of Haiti as this horrible place and full of great violence. And there's that too, but it's also full of these incredible people and people coming out of these great Haitian institutions of higher education. Um, and so I wanted this story to be revealed. The Haitians who went to the Congo and then who ended up in Boston, my parents, this is why I'm here, who ended up in Paris, who ended up in Montreal, informing communities all over the world, right? And many of whom had great sympathy with notions of Black liberation and decolonization. So it's a story that's not very familiar to lots of Haitians. So I felt it was an important Black transnational story, an important story about Haiti and about Haitians. Um, and so for me, the history was really important. The personal history, but also the greater history, the geopolitical history too. So I look at, the dictatorship in Haiti. I look at the Cuban Revolution in 1959, which really shifted the terms of things in the Caribbean basin. I look at African decolonization movements of the 1960s. So all of this is taking place. And then there are these people who leave their homes and travel 6,000 miles away with little kids, you know, trying to live and trying to make their lives. So the history was important. And then, I was a little kid
How
who
old were you when you came here?
I was 6 years old when I came to the United States after having lived in the Democratic Republic of the Congo with my parents and the Haitians who were there. So history was really important. And, because I was a kid, I wasn't sort of processing things as an historian, right? I wasn't doing literary analysis. It's now, in my venerable age that I get to do that. So
You had a previous book, Letters from Congo. Is your new book a far jump from that, or am I totally off the mark here?
no, no, you're so right on it. It's that chapbook, Letters from Congo, ends up being the germ for the new book. And some of those poems make their way into the new book.
Another question from Robert. Two of your poems tonight are about naming. What inspired you? And were you at all inspired by Adam naming the animals in the Bible?
Oh,
Interesting.
yeah, that's a great analogy. I like that idea. I hadn't thought of that, but I will think about that. Um, I think uh, naming uh, is an important act of, or can be an important act of historical reclamation. Like what we name things is really important. Am I impatient or am I eager? right? The nuances of language, and naming and language helps us conceive of things. Like a really quick example, I was teaching a section on U.S. schooling and talking about the school marms, the women who in the United States in the 19th century who went out west to teach, and thinking about feminist statements. And then one student, raised her hand and said, "Well, you're using the term women, but what if one doesn't subscribe to the gender binary?" And I was like, "Whoa." Oh, okay, wow. Yeah, all right. This is like 12 years ago, right? And so this student really made me think about how we use terms for gender. And of course, now we're much more familiar with, gender neutral terms like they, all right? She, he, they, Zer, and so on, all right, which changes how we think about, bodies and sexuality and gender and so on. So naming is a super powerful act. Robert, thank you for that question.
Let me jump back to when you were the poet laureate of Boston. Tell me a little bit about that, and what was the most fun or interesting thing which happened during your term?
Oh gosh. Yeah. I had it was a really wonderful and is a really wonderful position. It's a public facing role in which you get to talk to people about poetry across the city of Boston. One of the things I enjoyed most was getting to the various branches of the Boston Public Library, of which there are 24 all
Wow.
across the city. And I would set up office hours for people just to come in and chat about poetry. And sometimes I would do a workshop. And some people would come and say, this has been under my bed for 25 years. And is it a poem? Right. And sometimes it would be the most remarkable poem. And so I really enjoyed meeting Bostonians around poetry, some of whom were very familiar with poetry and the writing of poetry, some of whom were less familiar with prosody and so on, and reminding people of the poetry they already carry within them. I think many of us, uh, you know, have poetry as one of the first artistic forms we encounter. Nursery rhymes, jump, jump rope rhymes, right? Rhymes in the schoolyard. So many of us already are exposed to poetry very, very young. So reminding people that they already know poetry, right? And then expanding. Yeah.
Now, were you ever called as laureate into a situation that was extremely non-poetic? For example, create a poem at some groundbreaking ceremony for some bureaucratic something or other.
Well, any occasion can be poetic. I would first you. But there was every year the mayor of the city of Boston gives gives the state of the city address, generally in January. In the past, it's been held at Boston Symphony Hall, which is this huge hall um, with an audience capacity of 2,500. And so the first year I became laureate, I was asked to write an occasional poem, a poem for the occasion of the mayor's State of the City address. You can imagine the pressure that one might feel to try to make a poem that speaks to the occasion, that is not intentionally offensive, right? That and that attempts to capture, a sense of Boston. Right? This is typically a poem that I would not ever write, in my own like regular life as a poet. Right? So there was uh that was a hard, it was really hard. But then I thought, okay, let me think about the history of Boston. And so that became like the catalyst, like when did Boston start? Where did Boston start? Is it with do I reference the indigenous communities here, before the European settlers, right? And then what is my Boston today? And that includes my neighbors across the street, um, in a house that belonged to Tom Laughlin's grandparents. Tom Laughlin is here in the audience, right? And Tom and I. Well, anyway, so that's. I hope I've answered the question.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's much easier if you liked the mayor too. I mean, that's if you didn't like the mayor, it'd be even another roadblock for.
Oh, yes, no, I liked the mayor. I liked the mayor's
It was,
happy.
it was Walsh at the time, or some of the time, correct?
It was Walsh during my tenure. Yes.
I ran into this in one of your bios, which I'm fascinating about. You taught at the Joyner Institute for the Study of War and Social Consequences Writers Workshop, which is a mouthful. So tell me a little bit about that workshop, because obviously there's so many social consequences that have to do with war. So what were you like? How are you prompting the students into this?
Yeah. The Joyner Institute Writers Workshop was a really wonderful place for people, not necessarily all of whom were veterans, but many of whom were veterans of various wars. It was begun when veterans were returning from the Vietnam War, right? As a writers workshop to help them, think about and their experiences, right? And talk about their experiences, and later sort of expanded to include people who were whose poetry was not disconnected to questions of social justice. And so it's had great faculty, Youssef Comignac, Martha Collins, Fred Marchant, Martina Espada coming through. So the faculty was able to work with students whose work could be political, unlike other places, right? So it was always for me a really great space to one, meet people with aesthetics and politics that were not far from my own, and people who were interested in thinking about very serious issues, including wars, enslavement, issues of social justice across the world and here at home.
So, with social justice and social consciousness, do you find your work, are you more proud of yourself when you complete a wonderful poem that has a social justice, social conscious message, or are you more proud of yourself when you've done an awesome poem about nature, or you described a flower or a scene as never before?
That's an interesting question. Um, I don't know that I feel proud of myself if I've completed a work. I I think poems can do many, many different kinds of things. Um, and so I don't know that I place a hierarchy on the kinds of poems I produce. I just think that a poem has to be, um, before I put it out into the world, it has to be good. It has to be saying something. And good, of course, is subjective, but it has to do something I hope that I've never done before each poem. And I don't know that I divorce my sort of political self from my aesthetic self. I think that they're joined, but I don't always write an overtly political poem, although the stateless poem that I read to open this evening is decidedly, I think, you know, responding to a political situation. So.
Well, Danielle, I want to thank you for joining us and reading and chatting. I want to show people the book once. Well, here's the new book. Definitely check it out. It came out, as you can see, this last January. And if you're ever curious about her other books, you know how to find them as well. So, Danielle Legros Georges, thank you so much for being here and being our guest.
Yes, and Tim, I should say that the book is coming out in January of 25.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's coming out in a little over half a year.
So pre-orders will be starting pretty soon.
Yes, please. Yes.
Well, great. I will look forward to it. And folks that are probably not watching in group or may want to join us for the open mic, come on in. I will let you in with the link right now because now we'll do the open. And again, thank you so much, Daniel.